Hey everybody, it's Luke with Responsibility for Freedom. I'm going to talk today about creationism over evolution. People ask me, do I believe in God? So that comes up when you're talking about different things. And like everyone else, I was taught evolution was science backed and whatever in school, as many of us were. But I'm biased. I grew up believing that God created everything, because of my religious background that I was born into. But, even as a kid, when I was contemplating what they were explaining to us about evolution, it didn't make sense to me. Some of the things like, we came from primates or we evolved from chimpanzees. Well, if we evolved from them, then why are they still here? Because the whole concept of evolution is natural selection, survival of the fittest, meaning these evolutionary things had to take place for the survival of the species, and evolution is the movement from one animal, creature, or whatever to another higher life form. Well, then it always bothered me. It didn't make sense that that higher life form or the other life form would still exist. So how can you move from one to another and then still have it? So they say everything came from the ocean. So we came from fish, and all the plants on the land came from the ocean. Well, then I don't know how you could still have that species. So we came from a fish, but the fish was still there, and then all the different kinds of fish, and then all the different kinds of mammals, and they all came from each other, but they all leave each other behind as they progress to change. So why would some change and not some, and others not change? It made no sense to me. Also, there is a leap of faith when you say, well, God created everything. So, yeah, but where's the evidence of that? Well, there's a leap of faith, too, in the evolution theory, that we came from rocks, the primordial soup, the Big Bang. Where did the matter come from? So quantum mechanics talks about things that pull right out of the ether or the quantum world, the invisible, right into the physical. And there's all kinds of experiments and metaphysical books written about those things. But specifically about God, usually atheists, right? They want to get into the world of, what's the religious take on God? Well, there's the problem right there. It's because you get lost into all these things that humans dream up for which God, and they all believe in the supreme being of God in one religion or the other. But I think they're missing the point. And so when I refer to God, this is what I'm referring to. Replace the word God with energy. So always has been there, can't be destroyed, can't be created or destroyed. It permeates all of life, and everything is energy in one form or another. And so when I think of God, I think of a conscious intelligence existence that permeates and pulls things into life or creates life. And I'm going to give two examples of two experiments that I think show an example of that. So what one Russian, funny thing is they were both Russian scientists, independent of each other. For some reason, one of them had some life, like single cell amoebas and different, some life in a test tube that was sealed. And then they took distilled water in a clean, sterile test tube, put it beside the other one, left it for the weekend. And when they came back after the weekend, the one that was just distilled water had the life from the other beaker completely sealed in it. It had showed up. So that's pretty surprising, a result. I think you'd agree there. And then another Russian scientist took beach sand, heated it to 1,000 degrees Celsius, put it into a tube, and then put distilled water and sealed it. Left it for the weekend. And noticed inside of it was single-celled organisms showed up. Some weird thing, eyelash showed up in there. Some skin cells, just all kinds of life was in there. And so that just kind of led me to believe that if you have minerals and you have water, you're going to get life. Now, that doesn't show things moving from one to the other, and I don't believe that takes place in nature anywhere. I don't think the missing link they claim they're looking for, it doesn't exist. And another thing is, you go to any museum in the world that shows evolution, it's all taught in schools mostly, is you see, man's progression. It's like ape-like, and then it moves up to Homo erectus, and all those different names they have, and then you end up with us. And they say that that's the progression of evolution. And they have no evidence to support that. None. Zero. There's no fossil evidence at all. Not a shred of it. Not a bone, nothing. But what they can't talk about is what's a fact is giants. There are giants in this human on every continent. Just do a research and you'll find they're finding giant skulls, double rows of teeth. They've found skeletons 12 feet, 13, 14, 15 feet, some 20 feet tall. Now, you've never seen the progression of mankind with the giant in there, because where would these have come from? So they ignore it. They find these skulls, but they're not taught in school. They just ignore it. Well, you can't teach evolution the way I believe they're teaching it and then ignore a fundamental flaw in the whole idea. But what really settles this whole issue for me is simply the DNA. Anybody on the earth who's teaching evolution knows they're full of it. They have to know, because anybody who knows anything about DNA, the structure of the code for whatever species or whatever the animal is or whatever it is, the code of the DNA is only for that animal, and that is it. And it cannot be anything else. The engineering drawings in the DNA can only contain the engineering drawings to produce that in and of itself. And then they'll point to mutations or variations in the dog world. Nobody's ever looked at any dog, no matter what shape or size or what it looked like, and thought it was a cat. Nobody would assume that dog was turning into anything else. It's an absurdity. So variations inside a species proves nothing, except that species can have some diversity in it. And that's it. There's nothing on this planet that's turning from one thing into another. And they'll talk about mutations and viruses. Listen, there's no virus turning into a bacteria or a bacteria turning into a virus. So there's no scientific evidence. And like I said, anybody who knows anything about DNA, that settles the issue. It's not even, why are we spewing this nonsense? It's nonsense. And that's why I believe in my version that an intelligence permeates the energy. That intelligence is what directed life. And now I'm going to give you an example. Now, when we talk about us, where did we come from? Well, that's a fair question. Now, geneticists around the world, the metadata for the human genome, the mapping of the human genome, is not accessible to like, you can't go online and look up the human genome. You have to be an academic. You have to be in a institution, a government-recognized institution. You have to submit a request. And you have to identify which part of the strand you want to look at, for what reason, and then it has to be released to you. Now, I don't think that's fair. I think we should be allowed to look at the metadata, because it tells you a lot. And I'll give you, now, these are some of the interviews and books that I've read, and some of this is off the record. So geneticists will say things off the record that they can't say publicly, and they won't say publicly. One of those things is, if anybody wants to research, they're discovering dinosaur bones that they're slicing open and finding soft tissue and live blood cells in there. Well, maybe not live, but there's certainly soft, malleable blood cells that are containing DNA. And they're soft tissue. Now, if this animal died 65 million years ago, that's a scientific impossibility, but this is what they're finding out, and they're refusing to do testing on the age of it or acknowledging it at all, or there's a lot of funny stuff, and you can do some research on that. So they're finding soft tissue in dinosaur bones, but the scientific community is kind of reluctant to even look at it. So geneticists will say, so their careers don't get ruined, will say things off the record. And one such individual, I was watching a 2-hour talk, and he said that he spent many conversations with them specifically about the DNA of us, humans. And what they know is the mitochondrial DNA of the female is, you can trace it back from mother to mother to mother to mother. And you can actually trace it back to how long before we showed up. And it's about 200,000 to 250,000 at the most. So that's when we showed up. So let's just use that number. So 250,000 years ago, through that mitochondrial DNA, through the mother, we know that's when we showed up. Also, when you look at the DNA strand of humans, when you write code, so when code writers for computer code write code, they'll write code, it is a long strand, and then they'll put a break so they can go back and check their work. So the geneticists were saying we could see those code checks in our DNA. So that's clue number one, that we were manufactured, created. We also have 46 chromosomes, and every primate on Earth has 48. all primates on Earth have 48. So how come we have 46? Well, what happened? Well, 2 of our chromosomes, the geneticists say, were sliced, fused together, and then spun around and then connected back. That cannot happen in evolution. That's not a genetic mistake. That's a deliberate. It's like a doctor doing surgery on someone. You can go back and look at that person and know, oh, hey, wait, this appendix has been removed. Here's the scar. Here's the evidence. This had to have been done. And this is the same thing. So we were definitely manipulated, created. And there's another thing is we have over 4,500 genetic mistakes in our DNA code. That doesn't exist in nature. And what I mean by that is you could take an elephant, a cat, a dog, a lion. Their genetic code contains no defaults in it, like spinodipia or dwarfism or all these other issues. Now you might say, well, I've seen pictures and I've seen video of 2-headed calves, 3-legged calves, those kind of things. Those are misconnections between the egg and the sperm. Those are not genetic code mistakes. So we have over 4,500, which surmise some people to believe that, okay, well, whoever created us for whatever reason saw these mistakes and said, oh, we don't need to correct those. It's 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,000,000. It's not going to really affect, and so we'll just leave them in there. And these are things that geneticists will point out, which again debunks evolution, 7 ways to Sunday. And these are the things that we need to understand and know about. So we're not being told and taught everything when it comes to school, education, how the world works, how the universe works. I'll give you another example. We talk about the mathematical formulation for how gravity works and to explain the movements of the planets. When you look up and you visually see that the stars are moving in certain ways. Well, there's a bunch of stars that don't fit that. The math doesn't work. So what do? They come up with dark matter. And so if you look up what they're saying about dark matter, it's to explain these anomalies. Well, math can be used to explain something, but it doesn't prove something. Now, I was listening to somebody else who brought up a valid point. And if I say to you, Bob has 2 cars, Bob buys 2 more cars, how many cars does Bob have? Well, you would say he has 4. Math proves that he has 4. Well, math didn't prove anything. First of all, we don't know if Bob exists. Now, if you said Bob Smith, who lives in California, has, a 65 Cadillac, and his grandfather gave him a 79 Riviera, and he got an inheritance and went and bought a Volkswagen Beetle, and he bought a hearse. And here's his address, here's his phone number, and here's a video of Bob. How many cars does Bob have? Well, then you would say, yeah, well, he has 4 cars, and here's the evidence of that. When you look up at the stars and you say, well, math says that they're moving like this and they're this far away, that's math being used to describe something, but it doesn't prove that. So there's other people who do the parallax, looking up at the sky at a specific star at 2 different times, and they're basically saying that the stars are themselves moving and there's no difference in their distance. They're all in the same plane. Now, if that's true, well, that calls into almost question everything astronomers and astrologists say. And then we start to wonder, well, what's really going on? And then you start to question the world we live in. And I think that we can't be told the truth by the academics and the powers that be, the universities and the government-funded, all the science that's been going on is government-funded, right? Imagine you went in to get a government grant to say, look, I'm going to disprove climate change, or I want to see if climate change has anything to do with humans, and I think I'm going to disprove it, and I want some grant money. You're not going to get any. So then there's a flow where the money goes, the energy is going to flow, and there's this worldwide idea to tell us things that I don't believe are true. So I'll give you another example why I think that way. You look at the space. They tell us space is a vacuum. Okay, so I just don't understand how you can have an atmosphere of air, right, go up how many miles it goes up against the infinite vacuum of space and not be removed. Now, the simple answer is gravity, but they all admit that gravity gets weaker the further away you get. So now it's holding on to air against the vacuum. It just doesn't seem plausible. But the other reason why I question that space exists or is a vacuum at all is because all the evidence shown us by the authorities that be, NASA and other space agencies around the world. When they show us video and they say, this is space, we're in space, here, you can debunk them. You can clearly look at them. They're faking it. They're lying on their footage. They're showing things that aren't real over and over and over again. So if they're constantly lying about something, then I suspect that that isn't what it is. Or they certainly can't get there because they can't show us video of it. They can't show us a film of it. And anybody who says, well, I've seen film or whatever, just if you carefully, objectively look at it, you'll realize it's just made up nonsense. So here we are, living in a world that we really don't have the truth about. Now, if you dig and dig and dig, you can look at the information that's out there, that's published, that some scientists are willing to publish. And then you have to try to piece this together on your own. And that's kind of the hunt that I'm on. You know, what's this world really like? And what's it really built of? And where are we heading? That's kind of cool. Now, it's okay to believe in God like I do, right? We have this intelligence that I was talking about, and we were created by somebody else. Well, that doesn't mean that intelligence didn't create that something else. You know, it doesn't discredit who we are. And I think we still have, you know, I believe that we live past this physical being and we do move into the spiritual world, I think. And then you decide to come back and forth. I think that really does go on. So I think it's interesting to consider these things, and I hope you do too. All right, keep it free.